Banished to the void, humans built the largest empire in history. The star behind the fleet was going dark, and it was going dark fast. Scout Commander Drell pushed his hands against his console. He hit the diagnostic key. He hit the manual reset. He watched his board the way a man watches his own heart stop beating. The threat screen reads 0. The long-range scanners read 0. There were no contacts. There was nothing out there in the deep black they called the void. But the thick glass window in front of him said something else. Something huge was eating the light. It took the star one slice at a time. It was not a shadow. Shadows did not have hard, straight edges. It was metal, and it was not on any chart the Ascari mandate had ever made. Drell opened his mouth to shout an order. He keyed the retreat code. His voice cracked in the middle of the word. For 18,000 years, the mandate had ruled the core stars, and in all that time it had been certain of one thing. The dead space past the border held nothing but dust and the bones of the people it had thrown there. 500 years ago, the Ascari had banished the humans into that void to die quietly. Now a man named Fleet Marshal Graves sat 2 days away from the heart of their empire, and what Drell was screaming about was the exact reason Graves was so calm. The thing on the screen was not a fleet. It was bigger than a fleet. It was the largest thing anyone in the Ascari military would ever see, and it was wrapped around a sun like a hand closing into a fist. No fleet, no flag, no warning. Drell reached for the manual thruster override. He tried to tell his own ships to turn, to burn hard, to run. His hand found the heavy red lever on the panel. He never finished pulling it. I have stood in that chamber. I have smelled the air go still. What the warlord saw next, I am still not sure he survived. 2 days earlier, a black hull slid toward a ring of light hung above 2 suns. The ship had no markings. It carried no name on the side, no fleet number on the bow, no proud crest on the tail. It was the color of a thing that did not want to be seen. It cut through the outer traffic lanes, aimed straight at the apex ring. The ring was a 40-mile crown of metal where the Ascari mandate gave its orders to 600 lesser worlds. Inside the black ship, Fleet Marshal Gideon Graves drank something lukewarm from a steel cup. He watched the massive ring grow in the bridge glass. Graves was 61 years old. He wore a faded leather flight jacket over his dark combat armor. It was the kind of jacket a man keeps because it fits, not because it looks like anything important. His thumb rested on a worn steel chronometer in his palm. He clicked the side button once. The small metal snap sounded loud in the quiet room. "They have locked their outer guns on us," said a younger voice behind him. Tactician Mercer stood near the back wall. He was hunched over a heavy brass cylinder. He held it with both hands and would not let anyone else carry it. "Good," Graves said. He took another drink. "Means they see us." "They are hailing again," Mercer added. He tapped a screen. "Same order, hold or burn." "Let it run." Graves set his cup on the rail. "We are not here to answer their calls. We are here to make one." A woman sat at the communications desk to his right. Emissary Cross smoothed her uniform. She had no weapon on her belt. She pulled up a file on her screen and read the text with quick, sharp eyes. "By Ascari law, they will demand a bow before we speak," Cross said. She did not look up from the screen. "They will demand we list our rank, our homeworld, and our crime. That is the rule for exiles." "We are not exiles," Graves said. "I know," Cross replied. "I am just telling you what the warlord expects. He will try to force you to your knees." "He can try." Graves clicked his chronometer again. Across the bridge, traffic control from the ring filled the main speakers. The alien voice was sharp. It was rising in pitch. The mass on approach was not slowing. The mass on approach had ignored 4 orders to hold position. The mass on approach would be fired upon if it crossed the inner marker line. 10 seconds to the inner marker," Mercer called out. "Keep our speed," Graves said. 5 seconds, Mercer said. Graves did not run. He did not brace his feet. He did not give a single order to dodge or raise shields. He pulled on the collar of his leather jacket and watched the red line on the screen get closer. "Crossing the line," Mercer said. The ship slid past the boundary. The alarms on the Ascari stations flashed. Nothing happened. No guns fired, no missiles launched. "They did not shoot," Cross noted. She closed her file. "They won't," Graves said. "He will want to look at us first. Men like him always want to look at the thing before they kill it." He turned away from the glass and walked toward the main hatch. "Bring the cylinder, Mercer. Do not open it until I nod." The High Arbiter Zorith Khan was in the middle of dictating trade law when his guards told him a ghost ship had docked. Zorith Khan was a tall thing, near 8 feet high. He was wrapped in a hard crystal shell that caught the chamber light and threw it back cold. He breathed through thin tubes at his throat. They hissed every time he took a breath. In his right hand, he held a heavy scepter that hummed with caged lightning. With that hand, he had ended 11 worlds that thought about saying no. He was standing on the high center platform of the Grand Apex. 600 delegates sat in curved rows around him. He did not stop his speech when the guard whispered the news. He finished the legal clause. He signed the order that cut off fresh water to a minor colony that had missed a grain shipment. He handed the datapad back to his clerk. Power in the mandate meant never hurrying for anyone else's crisis. "A ghost ship," Zorith Khan said at last. His voice filled the dome. He almost sounded pleased. From the void. Subarbiter Vey, a nervous young Askari clerk near the wall, bowed low. "Yes, High Arbiter, it bears no mandate codes. It matches the old colony designs, but altered. The metal is wrong." "The graveyard sends us a beggar," Zorith Khan said. He leaned on his scepter. "Bring them to the floor. Let the lesser worlds watch a dead thing ask for water. It will be a good lesson for the colonies who think about breaking our rules." 600 delegates leaned in. The air in the chamber smelled of cold nitrogen and old stone. It was the smell of a place that had never once been afraid. All of the delegates had bowed to reach their seats. In the mandate, you bowed before you spoke, and most of them had spent their whole lives doing it. A few of the older delegates, the ones from worlds the Askari had broken a long time ago, sat very still. They said nothing. They just watched the great bronze doors at the end of the hall. The doors opened. Graves walked in. He did not bow. He walked down the long bronze floor with Cross and Mercer behind him. He carried one steel cup of nothing in his head. He looked left and right, taking in the crystal ceiling and the rows of silent aliens, and he looked entirely unimpressed. He stopped at the center speaking podium. It was a low block of white stone meant for the condemned. Graves reached into his jacket. He pulled out a block of dead iron and set it on the pristine white stone. It landed with a heavy, ugly thunk. It was an old transponder. It was a primary emergency beacon, rusted through on the sides. It was the exact kind of beacon the first human colony ships had carried into exile when the mandate pushed them out. It had not sent a signal in 5 centuries. Graves placed it the way you place a stone on a grave. He folded his hands. He said nothing. A quiet ripple went through the delegates. This was not how a beggar behaved. Beggars dropped to their knees. Beggars cried. Beggars spoke fast. This man just stood there in a worn coat and stared up at the tallest warlord in the galaxy. Zorith Khan looked down at the rust on his clean white floor, his head tilted. The crystal joints in his neck ticked. "You bring me garbage," the Arbiter said. Graves pulled the chronometer from his pocket. He clicked it. "You are the remnant," Zorith Khan went on. His voice carried the easy weight of a man who owned the room. "You are the children of the ones we cast out. You survived the dark. Good for you. But now your engines are failing, and your air is thin, and you have crawled back to the only hand that can feed you." The warlord raised his scepter. 400 laser lances bloomed to life along the upper walls. They made a ring of small white wines. Every single one of them pointed down at the black ship in the bay, and the 3 small humans on the floor. "I will be generous," Zorith Khan said. He pointed the scepter at Graves' chest. "Submit to biometric tagging. Surrender your vessel to my guard. Accept refugee status. You will be placed in the lowest tier. You will have no vote, no rights, and no land you did not first beg for. You have 3 of your minutes to comply." A digital clock appeared in red light above the center floor. It read 3 minutes. It began to fall. Graves looked up at the red numbers. He did not look afraid. He looked like a man checking a bus schedule to see if he had time to buy a coffee. Behind him, his people held still. Emissary Cross stood with her hands folded. Mercer had not let go of the brass cylinder. Subarbiter Vey kept glancing between the humans and his master as though one of them had broken a rule he could not name. Graves clicked the chronometer again. Then, for the first time, he spoke to the warlord directly. "Your sensors have been lying to you," Graves said. His voice was plain and unhurried. Zorith Khan frowned. The crystal plates on his face shifted. "What did you say?" "Your border buoys," Graves said. For 40 years, your buoys have read a heat bloom coming from the edge of the void. Your science guilds filed it as stellar drift. They told you the stars were just cooling and the dust was just moving. Graves let the silence sit for 1 second. It was never drift. You have been reading our exhaust. Something flickered in the chamber. A delegate 3 rose up, turned to the one beside her, and whispered fast. Down on the floor, Subarbiter Vay's tubes hitched. He let out one short hiss. The clerk looked at the rusted iron on the podium, as if it had grown teeth. Zoreth Khan did not move. You speak of heat. The void has no heat. The void is where heat goes to die. It was, Graves agreed. The clock fell past 2 minutes. Cross spoke. Mercer moved. Graves waited. Emissary Cross stepped forward first. Her heels hit the bronze floor hard. She looked directly up at the warlord. Speaking for the human territories, Cross said. She spoke even and exact, like a woman reading a receipt to a bad customer. We decline refugee status. We decline tagging. We decline the surrender of our ship. We are not here to be catalogued. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. We are here to update your maps, she said. The chamber made a sound it had not made in a long time. It was the sound of pure, total confusion. 600 delegates heard her. These were people who had bowed every day of their lives. They had learned that the word no cost you a world. Now they heard a small human woman say it flat, out loud, and walk no part of it back. Zoreth Khan's breathing tubes hissed loudly. Update, he repeated. He spat the word out. Your charts are wrong, Cross said. She stood her ground. We thought you should see the correct ones before there is a misunderstanding about borders. For a long heartbeat, the warlord said nothing. He gripped his scepter tight. Then the crystal shell of his face shifted and something like amusement crossed it. The smile was worse than rage. You have spent 500 years dying in the dark, Zoreth Khan said softly, and you have come to my house to tell me about geography. He lowered the scepter a degree. He pointed it straight at Cross. Guards, the Arbiter commanded, take them. Break their knees, tag them by force. We will see how the remnant speaks with our marks burned into its skin. The lances along the wall narrowed their light. Heavy guards in thick crystal plate peeled off the outer columns. They started toward the center floor. They moved slow and sure. They walked the way you walk toward an animal that is already trapped in a corner. Graves still had not raised his voice once. He looked at Cross. She did not step back. He looked at the falling clock. It was now under 1 minute. He looked at the rusted transponder on the podium, the dead iron block that had screamed for help into the dark for 500 years and got nothing back from the mandate. Something almost moved at the corner of Graves' mouth. It might have been a smile. Then he looked back at Mercer. Graves gave the smallest nod a man can give. You read silence as weakness, Graves said. His voice was quiet, plain, and dry as old paper. That was always going to be the mistake. Mercer's hand dropped to the top of the brass cylinder. The guards were 10 steps away. They raised their shock batons. The clock was at 40 seconds. Zoreth Khan, still holding his half-smile, did not yet understand what he had done. He had let an enemy carry an unopened weapon all the way to the center of his power, and he had pointed his soldiers at the wrong thing entirely. Last warning, Remnant, the Arbiter said. Open your hands and fall to the floor. We will open them, Graves said. Watch. Mercer's fingers closed on the cylinder's seam. He twisted the cap hard. Part 2 expanded, banished to the void. Mercer twisted the cap hard. The brass cylinder split open with a sound like a rifle crack. Red light spilled out. It cut across the chamber floor like something alive. It found the crystal ceiling and filled the air with the color of warning and consequence. 600 delegates leaned back. The guards stopped moving. Even Zoreth Khan's breathing tubes went still. A projector hummed to life inside the cylinder. The light bent. It shaped itself. It became a map. Not a map on a screen, not a flat thing you held in your hands, a living three-dimensional model of space that floated above the center floor in red light. At the middle of it, small and pale and almost invisible, sat the Ascari Mandate, the core worlds, the empire that had ruled the deep stars for 18,000 years. On this map, they looked like a dot someone had drawn and then mostly erased. That is your current territory, Graves said. His voice did not rise. The red light washed across his face and made him look like a man standing in fire who felt no heat at all. That is the space you have. That is the space you control. The chamber held its breath. None of the delegates moved. They had lived their entire lives inside this small, pale circle. Some of them had never been outside it. Some of them had never been outside the capital ring. Their whole universe had fit inside that speck. They had thought it was everything. Zoreth Khan stepped forward. His hand tightened on the scepter. His crystal face caught the red light and threw it back in pieces. You show me a map made in your own exile, a fantasy, a lie made of light. His voice was still smooth, but something beneath it had cracked, the kind of crack that appears in old crystal right before it shatters completely. Watch, Graves said simply. The map moved. It expanded outward. The mandate stayed in the center, small, becoming smaller as the sphere of red light grew and grew. The void opened up. The space past the border, the dead black graveyard where humanity had been thrown 500 years ago, began to light up. It showed colonies, real ones, not the scattered survival pods that mandate science had predicted would fail. Proper colonies, rooted, built to last. The red light painted them like they were emerging from the black, like they had been waiting for 500 years to be seen. A delegate in the third row, Subarbiter Vey's counterpart from the hegemony worlds, grabbed his personal screen. He pulled up files that his people had been maintaining. Rumors, whispers from traders who ventured near the border, reports of lights in the dark that could not be identified, messages in encryption patterns that nobody had been able to break. His face went white as old bone. The map showed more, stations spinning in the void, space yards where human ships were being built in numbers too large to count, mining platforms hanging from asteroid chains like pearls on a string, whole manufacturing sectors carved out of the dark. The red light found them one by one and named them. It showed that none of them were small, none of them were struggling. All of them were thriving. A Yethai's trader in the back row, a being whose species had been confined to minor outer colonies for 3,000 years, began to weep. Not from fear, from something else. From the weight of watching the thing they had thought was impossible materialize in red light in front of them. The mandate scientists, who were scattered throughout the chamber, began making calculations on their personal devices. They were checking the numbers. Cross had given them the raw data, and now they were running it through their own systems, trying to find the flaw. Trying to find the place where the numbers broke and made sense again. They could not find it. A woman 3 rows up from Zoreth Khan stood up. She was from one of the oldest mandate worlds, a place that had been loyal for 10,000 years. She stood without being asked, and she said nothing. She just pointed at the map, at one specific cluster of lights, at a place that looked like her own homeworld but was 10 times larger, 10 times more alive. That was when the chamber understood. These were not alien worlds. These were not places that humans had been given in trade. These were the missing colonies. These were the ones the mandate had thrown into the void. The maps showed them exactly where they had been sent, and they showed that they had not died. They had built. The map expanded again, faster this time. It swept outward into the abyssal trench, the long black nothing that separated the mandate's territory from everything else. The trench was supposed to be empty. The trench was supposed to protect them. The trench was supposed to be a wall. On this map, the trench was full. It was full of anchors. They were small, each one a human fleet stationed in the black, waiting, watching, holding steady. The map made them glow red. They spread out through the nothing like a web, like a net, like a hand wrapping around something fragile. The hand of something patient. The hand of something that had been waiting 500 years for this exact moment. The hand of something that had learned to build in the dark. Zoreth Khan's scepter slipped in his hand. He caught it before it fell. His breathing tubes were hissing loud now, sharp little sounds of something under pressure trying to escape. His crystal face was flickering between colors, pale green to white to something that might have been gray if stone could fear. Count them, Graves said. Your science guilds can count them. Your delegates can see them on their personal screens. Count. The chamber erupted, not in alarm, not in rage, in pure, stunned silence that felt louder than screaming. Every delegate had activated their personal screen at the same moment. Every delegate was looking at the same number, appearing again and again in their feeds, in the raw data Cross had transmitted, in the backup feeds that were now lighting up across the mandate's entire network. 22,000. Subarbiter Vey was staring at the number like it was a physical thing that had entered his body. A Yethai's officer in the corner of the chamber was reading it out loud in a voice that had stopped working halfway through. A Sicarian diplomat from the Edge colonies was recalculating it 3 times on her personal pad, checking the math, checking the source, checking to see if she had somehow misread the decimal point. She had not. There were 22,000 human anchors in the trench. 22,000 fleets, 22,000 positions, 22,000 promises of fire, all pointing inward, all aimed at the small pale speck that was the mandate, the empire, the 18,000-year certainty that had never learned to be afraid. Some of the older delegates began to understand what the map was really showing. It was not just a count. It was a deployment pattern. It was a siege. It was the moment right before the walls come down, when the enemy has circled you completely, when there is nowhere left to run. It was the moment right before everything you built falls. "This is the Crucible Directive," Graves said. His voice was plain and clear, and it cut through the silence like a blade through cloth. 50 years ago, we finished the first anchor. 10 years ago, we finished the last. For 500 years, you told the galaxy that you had buried us, that you had thrown us into the dark to die quietly. You were right about one thing." He paused. The red light from the map was starting to fade. The circle was contracting. The mandate's territory was growing larger relative to the overall space, but everyone in the chamber knew what that meant. It meant they were being shown the closing of a trap. It meant they were inside it. "You locked us in the graveyard," he said. "We just built a better forge." The map collapsed. The red light snuffed out. The cylinder went dark. The darkness in the chamber felt complete, like the light had never been there at all. Like someone had reached in and turned off not just the projector, but the possibility of light itself ever returning. For one long second, no one moved. No one spoke. Zoreth Khan stood with his scepter in his hand, staring at the empty space where the map had been. His crystal face had gone the color of old bone. His breathing tubes were making sounds they had never made before. High-pitched hisses, sounds of distress, sounds of something inside him refusing to accept what it had just learned. The sound of a warlord whose certainty was breaking apart. Subarbiter Vey was moving his lips without sound. His eyes were fixed on the space where the number had been. 22,000. He was trying to speak it, trying to name it, trying to do the thing that the bureaucracy had taught him to do when confronted with incomprehensible numbers. File them away, catalog them, make them official so they could be managed. But there was no filing system large enough for this. A clerk beside him grabbed his console and began to pull up auxiliary feeds, backup systems, external sensors, anything that might show that what they had just seen was false, that it was theater, that it was a trick. But they all knew it was not false. The air in the chamber had changed. It smelled different now. The sterile nitrogen that Graves had noticed when he first walked in was still there, but underneath it was something new. The smell of fear. The smell of something dying. The smell of 1,000 species who had lived for millennia under the absolute certainty of mandate rule, suddenly understanding that the certainty was gone. Around the room, delegates were checking their personal screens. Faces went pale. Some of them looked at the source of the data and realized it had come directly from Cross's pad. Others were pulling up their own historical files, the ones they kept locked away, records of what had been sent into exile, where it had been sent, how many resources they had used to seal the barrier. Some of them, the ones from Broken Worlds, the ones who had been waiting 500 years to see their chains cut, they began to smile. Slow smiles. The smiles of people who had just watched the sky crack open and let out the light. The smiles of people who understood that the thing they had thought was impossible had spent 500 years becoming real. A delegate from the outer ring, a woman who had spent her whole life consolidating power in the shadow of the mandate, stood up. She did not speak. She simply stood and turned toward the great bronze doors. Other delegates began to do the same, not from any order, not from any signal, from the simple understanding that the moment had changed and they had to move with it or drown in its wake. Graves turned to Cross. Cross nodded. She pulled up a file on her personal pad and with one clean gesture transmitted something directly to every delegate in the chamber, every military commander in the outer stations, every station chief and garrison commander and harbor master across the entire breadth of mandate territory. New star charts, corrected maps, the actual borders of human space laid out in coordinates and treaty language and the cold legal precision that Cross loved. The documents that said, "The void is ours. What you call the void is not empty. The void has people. The void has governments. The void has citizens and trade routes and ancient cities built in the dark where no one was supposed to be able to build anything at all. The documents that said, "You were wrong." Zorith Khan watched the numbers flood into his delegates' hands. He watched them read. He watched the reality of it settle into their faces like something dying, like a plant watching the sun go out, like a fish realizing the water around it had turned to stone. His left hand was shaking, the hand that did not hold the scepter, the hand that had never shaken in 18,000 years of mandate rule, the hand that had signed the decrees that ended worlds. "This is a bluff," the warlord said. His voice was quiet now, smaller, hollowed out, like someone had reached inside him and scooped out the part that used to believe in his own immortality. "You have thrown light at me. You have shown me an image. This is theater. This is a trick made to frighten the lesser worlds into thinking the void has teeth." Graves did not argue. He simply clicked his chronometer. The small metal snap sounded impossibly loud in the silence. It was the kind of sound that carried weight. The kind of sound that said, "I have done this before. I will do this again. The outcome does not change." "It is not," Graves said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The chamber was hanging on every word now. "You have 5 minutes before the 7th Vanguard enters the trench to test those coordinates. If you believe I am bluffing, send them. Test the claim, see what happens." Zorith Khan's breathing tubes were hissing fast now, fast enough that some of the younger delegates were covering their ears, fast enough that it sounded like the air itself was screaming. His hand was shaking on the scepter. Both hands were shaking now. He looked at Graves the way a man looks at something that has revealed itself to be far larger than he had thought. The way a man looks when he realizes that the ground beneath his feet was never as solid as he believed. The way a man looks when he understands, in a moment of perfect clarity, that he had made a choice 50 years ago or 500 years ago that could not be unmade. The choice to banish them. The choice to seal them in the dark. The choice to believe that the dark could kill them. The warlord's jaw moved. For a moment it looked like he might give the order to destroy the humans where they stood. To violate every law of protocol, every rule of the mandate, and burn them out of existence right here, right now, before the 7th Vanguard could test those coordinates and prove what everyone was starting to understand was true. But Zorith Khan did not give that order. Instead, he reached up with his free hand, his shaking hand, his hand that had never shaken. He touched his communication pendant. One single word came through the chamber speakers, in his voice, clipped and hard. "Deploy." The message went out from the High Arbiter's office. It traveled through crystal transmitters that had been in place for 10,000 years. It raced through quantum repeaters that had never failed. It crossed the distance between the center of the mandate and the outer defensive stations in the time it took for a heartbeat. At the edge of the void, where the 7th Vanguard sat in the black, where 500 warships floated in formation like they were sleeping, the message arrived. The 7th Vanguard was the mandate's finest fleet. 500 warships, each one armed and ready. 500 hunters with the best weapons the mandate had ever built. 500 instruments of absolute authority. They had never lost a battle. They had never even come close. They turned toward the trench. They accelerated. The acceleration pushed their crews back in their seats. The engines that had been designed to move slowly, to show strength through mass rather than speed, roared to life for the first time in generations. They had been built for parades. They had been built to demonstrate power. They had never been built for speed. But they moved fast now. They crossed the border line. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. The sensors on the mandate's outer stations were picking up the deployment. They were logging it. They were sending notifications back to the center. They were doing what they had been programmed to do for 10,000 years. Then the chamber's main screen flickered. It was picking up a live feed from one of the scout command ships that had been trailing behind, trying to understand what had just happened, trying to make sense of a scenario that had no precedent, trying to find some file in the ancient military archives that could tell them what to do when the Empire's certainty collapsed. It was the same scout feed that Drell, the commander out on the edge of the void, had been screaming into 500 years ago. The same view, the same vantage point, the same star engine wall. But now the chamber could see it in context. Now the entire mandate could see what Drell had been watching. Not a shadow, not a mystery, not a thing that had no category, a fleet, a human fleet, vast beyond measure. 22,000 anchor points synchronized and moving like the parts of a single organism, like neurons firing in a vast brain, like the fingers of a hand closing into a fist around the 7th Vanguard. The human fleet began to fire. They fired in patterns that must have taken 50 years to design. They fired in waves that synchronized across 22,000 separate positions, separated by millions of miles of the abyssal trench, all firing at the same moment like they had been waiting for this for 500 years. They had been. The first Mandate warships died at light speed, their reactors overloading before their sensors could even register the attack. By the second, whole squadrons had been erased. By the third second, the feed was starting to break up because there was too much debris, too much plasma, too much chaos for the sensors to process. The 7th Vanguard lasted 8 seconds. By the 4th second, half the warships had been erased from the feed. The command ships were still trying to relay orders. The captains were still trying to form new formations to respond with the tactics that had worked for 10,000 years. But those tactics required time. They required maneuvering room. They required an enemy that followed rules. The human fleet did not follow rules. By the 6th second, the 7th Vanguard stopped firing back. Not because they had surrendered, because there was nothing left to fire from. The weapons systems had been designed to demonstrate power, not to engage in real warfare. They had been built for a galaxy that was supposed to be stable, for an empire that was supposed to be eternal, for a universe that was supposed to bend to the Mandate's will. By the 8th second, there was nothing left but expanding debris and the cold geometry of the human fire, precise and relentless, cutting through space like a surgeon cutting out a tumor. The feed showed the last warship trying to jump, trying to enter jump space and flee. It did not make it. The feed cut out. The screen went black. The chamber went silent. And the silence was the worst thing of all. Because silence meant there was no more battle, no more hope that the 7th Vanguard had somehow survived, no more possibility that this had been a misunderstanding that could be resolved through negotiation or force. The silence meant that the Mandate's finest fleet, the thing they had been building on since the time of the first architects, was gone. 22,000 human anchors had killed 500 Mandate warships, and they had done it in 8 seconds. No alarm went off. No one had programmed an alarm for the moment when the Empire's last hope was erased. No order was given, because the chain of command went through Zorith Khan, and Zorith Khan was standing on his high platform, staring at the black screen, trying to compute a number too large for his mind to hold. No guard moved toward Graves. What good would it do? The guards in this chamber numbered less than 100. The human force in the trench numbered in the thousands. The guards had weapons that were designed for maintaining order. The humans had weapons designed to end worlds. No weapon fired. The laser lances that had been locked on the black ship in the bay went dead, not from any order. They went dead because the power system that supplied them had just been informed by the central station that it was no longer under Mandate control, that the Mandate had just ceased to exist as a functioning military entity. Even the breathing tubes had stopped. 600 delegates sat in absolute silence. They sat in the dark. They sat in a chamber that had never been silent, not in the whole 18,000 years of the Mandate's rule. There was always noise. There was always the sound of authority, of orders being given, of subordinates rushing to obey. There was always the hum of the life support systems and the crackle of the communication networks and the sound of status being maintained. Now there was nothing. Even the light above the floor had gone out. Zorith Khan stood on his high platform, scepter in hand, looking down at the small human man who stood in the dark below him. For the first time in his life, the warlord had no words. He had no response. He had no strategy for what happened when your entire civilization could be erased in 8 seconds. He had only the memory of 22,000 anchors. 22,000 promises. 22,000 promises of death, happening in real time on a screen that had gone black. His hand loosened. The scepter slipped from his grip. He tried to catch it. For a moment it looked like he might. Like some ancient reflex might kick in and let him hold onto power through force of will alone. But he could not. The scepter fell. It hit the stone floor of the grand apex with a sound like the world breaking. The sound of ancient authority hitting stone and shattering. The sound of 18,000 years of certainty becoming rubble. The clattering echo filled the chamber and did not stop. In the command center of the outer stations, alarms began to scream. In the orbital gun batteries that had pointed at the black ship for the past 30 seconds, targeting systems went haywire. Officers began checking and rechecking their own authority codes. They called up the chain. They called up their superiors. They called up the High Arbiter's office. No one answered. A young officer, someone who had spent his whole life following the rules of the mandate, sat at his console and tried to process what he was seeing. The 7th Vanguard was gone. The fleet that was supposed to protect the mandate had just been erased by a coordinated attack from 22,000 separate positions. The mathematics of it were impossible. The scope of it was impossible. The fact that he had not known about those 22,000 positions, that nobody in the entire military had known, was the most impossible thing of all. He began to request permission to stand down. He sent the message up the chain. He waited for approval. No approval came. In the bay where the black ship hung, dock workers froze. The master control systems began to cycle through their protocols. By law, a docked ship was under the mandate's security umbrella. By law, a docked ship was captive. Those were the rules that had existed for 500 years. Those were the laws that had never been questioned. Those rules were no longer in effect. The first thing the workers understood was that no one was coming to give them orders. The second thing they understood was that the ship in the bay was no longer captive. The third thing they understood was that they should probably leave. They left. Cross pulled out another data pad. She walked to the center of the floor where the rusted transponder still sat on the white podium. She activated a terminal that the mandate had left undefended. She had all the codes she needed. Graves had made sure of that. Her fingers moved fast and precise over the keys. She uploaded new star charts to every military installation in the mandate. She deactivated the authorization codes that had kept the outer orbital guns powered for 500 years. She did not do it softly. She did not ask for permission. She did it the way you do a thing that is yours to do, the way you walk into your own house and do not bother to knock. One by one, the gun batteries lost power. One by one, the targeting systems went dark. One by one, the mandate's grip on its own empire began to slip. Graves watched her work. He had never doubted her, not once in the months of preparation, not once when the plan was being built, not once in the moment when everything depended on her precision and speed. She was the most dangerous thing in this room now, more dangerous than the human fleet, more dangerous than the transponder, because she was taking away the tools of the mandate's power, not with weapons, but with bureaucracy, with the exact legal mechanisms that the mandate had used for 10,000 years to maintain control. She was beating them at their own game. One of the older delegates stood and began to walk toward the bronze doors. Then another. Then 5 more. They did not look at Zorith Khan. They did not wait for permission. They simply stood and walked, the way people walk away from something that is dying, the way people move away from the collapsing structure before it falls completely. No one tried to stop them. Graves stood and looked up at Zorith Khan. The warlord's crystal face had gone the color of old bone. His breathing tubes were making sounds they had never made before. The sound of something trying to compute a truth that had no precedent. The sound of a mind breaking under the weight of an impossible number. The sound of the end of the world, happening inside him in real time. "You locked us in the graveyard," Graves said. His voice was quiet and plain and dry as dust. "You sent us to die in the dark. You thought we would break. You thought we would beg. You thought 500 years of silence meant we had already surrendered. You were wrong about all of it." Zorith Khan's breathing tubes hissed. His crystal face shifted colors, pale green to white to something that might have been gray if stone could experience despair. "We did not beg," Graves continued. "We did not break, we built." He reached down. He picked up the rusted transponder from the podium. He looked at it in his palm, at the rust flaking off the iron, at the weight of it. It was heavier than it looked. But then, 500 years of hope tends to be heavy. It had been a distress beacon once, a scream into the dark, a plea for help that no one would answer, a final message from the condemned, screaming into the void, hoping that somehow someone would hear. Now it was something else entirely. It was proof. It was a monument to what humans could build when they had nothing else. It was the symbol of an age that was ending. Graves tapped the transponder once against his palm. The small sound of dead iron, light and final, like a gavel, like a judgment, like the moment when one era ends and another begins. Then he turned. He walked toward the great bronze doors. He did not run. He did not hurry. He did not need to. He walked the way you walk when you own the room, when you own the world, when you have just spent 500 years building a better forge and you have finally got to see what it can burn. Mercer followed, still carrying the brass cylinder. The cylinder that had changed everything. The cylinder that had held the key to the entire mandate's future in a space no larger than a man's fist. Cross followed, her pad still in her hand, her upload still flowing into the mandate systems, erasing 500 years of certainty one authorization code at a time. By the time she reached the doors, she had already shifted control of 12 orbital stations. By the time she stepped into the corridor, she had already begun the deactivation sequence for the main reactor that powered the High Arbiter's chambers. No one tried to stop them. Behind them, the chamber stayed silent. Zorith Khan stood on his platform, staring at the empty space where the transponder had been. His scepter lay on the stone floor where it had fallen. He did not pick it up. He did not give an order. He did not do anything at all. He only stood. He only breathed. He only tried with the crystalline structures of his mind to process a single, simple, impossible fact. He had lost, and he had lost to the dead. And the dead were walking out of his chamber like they had never been dead at all. The delegates who remained were beginning to move. Some of them were starting to talk. Quiet conversations at first, voices still learning how to speak without asking permission. But the conversations were growing, spreading, morphing into something new. Petitions, requests for asylum in human space, questions about trade, questions about what the future looked like now that the mandate was crumbling. Questions about power, because power was shifting, in real time, in front of 18,000 years of certainty. Power was moving from the old empire to something new, something that had been building in the dark, something that had learned patience. Something that had learned to forge in the void. In the outer dark of the abyssal trench, where 22,000 human anchors hung in formation, something changed. The feeds that had been dark went live again. The 22,000 turned slow in the black. They swung their nose sections away from the mandate's core worlds. They pointed themselves toward home. They began a long, patient withdrawal into the void. Not a retreat, a departure. They had come to deliver a message. The message had been delivered. Now they were going home, going back to the forge, going back to their cities in the dark, going back to their families and their communities and their civilization that had been built in silence, built in isolation, built in the certainty that one day they would be called upon to stand and deliver. That day had come. That day had passed. Now there were other things to do. Behind them in the small pale speck that was the mandate, alarms fell silent. Guards stood down. Delegates began to move and breathe and process a new world that had appeared in the space of 8 seconds. The graveyard had opened its eyes. The forge had spoken, and the age of silence had ended. In the depths of the chamber, Subarbiter Vey sat at his desk. He was crying. He was the youngest of the high administrators, had spent his whole life studying the mandate's history, had believed in the certainty of it the way other people believed in breathing. Now he was crying because he understood that everything he had been taught was a lie. The mandate had not sent the humans to die. The mandate had sent the humans to become something greater. The mandate had locked them in the graveyard and given them 500 years to build the future. And they had done it. They had done it. And now the mandate was finished. He did not know what came next. He did not know if he would be allowed to live. He did not know if the humans would want revenge. He did not know what happened to the administrators of a fallen empire. But he knew one thing. He knew it with absolute certainty. The age of the mandate was over. And nothing would ever be the same.